I'm just beginning another 4-hour drive from Brighton back to Nottingham. Obviously I do this every couple of days or so. You know, it is quite some commitment, but it's the impact of the journeys is lessened by driving this car, which I love so much. It's a funny thing with me in these Jaguars. You know, I've loved them. You know, really sort of been committed to them for the whole of my adult life, really. And I first saw one as a child, going back to, I think it'd be about 1975. We lived as a family. We lived in Derby in the middle of the UK, and we were due to take a foreign holiday. This is going back to the 1970s. You know, very few people took foreign holidays in those days. It wasn't the routine that it's become, but and as a family, I was just distracted then. There was nearly an accident on the other side of the road, a lorry skidding, and never mind. Anyway, as a family, we'd never really been very far. You know, we'd certainly never taken a foreign holiday, and we were going on a foreign holiday, I believe, to Portugal. We'd never flown before. So my father said, "Listen, let's go and find the airport." He didn't know where the airport was. It was near. He knew it was near London, Heathrow exactly, but it was around about a 120-mile drive. So we took a drive as a family to go and find the airport and to plan the route. There were no sat-navs or anything in those days, and it seems very curious, but it was 40 odd years ago. It was a different time, and I remember we must have been very, very close to Heathrow, because I would specifically remember the architecture of the buildings, the 1950s architecture on quite a busy sort of dual carriageway type of road, and I was sitting in the back, and this car just flew past, literally 120, 130 miles per hour. It would have been a 40 limit. My father sort of almost sprung out of his seat. "Idiot, what a fool," you know. I remember my mother saying, "What car would that be? And what was that?" And my dad said, "That's a Jagster. Definitely a Jagster," he said. And I was sitting in the back of the car, mightily impressed. I decided I was having a Jagster when I was old enough. And my day came very early in 1989. I'd just turned 19 years old, and I managed to buy a car I certainly couldn't afford to run, and it'd be a 1981 XJ6 4.2. It was silver with a black vinyl roof. And honestly, I so excited. I can't tell you how excited I was to own that car, and you know, to sort of drive it, and just it was a remarkable experience, and it didn't disappoint. I'd waited since childhood to have one, and I'd first seen one. When did I say? It was about 1975, and very occasionally, sort of during the early 80s through to the mid 1980s, I used to see a blue XJ6 in 1972, sort of occasionally driven around, and I'll mention that car later. But I got a little bit carried away, to be honest with the Jaguar situation. It was a scratch that wouldn't be scratched. I very quickly bought another XJ6. I kept the silver one, the 81. I bought a 1979. It was like a biscuity brown, very rusty. But obviously the rust was sort of hidden in the biscuity brown colour. But mechanically it was very strong. And then within about a year, then I bought a 1965 Mark 10. Yeah, that was also a 4.2. That was Old English white. I basically bought it in boxes. It had been restored. It had been stripped, rebuilt, and it just never got reassembled. So I bought it as a box of bits. It had freshly been repainted, and the engine had been rebuilt. So it took me about 6 months to figure out how to put it back together. And that was an amazing machine. You know, I kept that right through till 2007, in fact. And the XJ6 is the sort of Series 3s, and I had probably 9 or 10 Series 2s. All the Series 2s are spectacularly rotten. Just mechanically wonderful, but just rotten. They rotted so horrendously. I can't tell you how badly. Every single panel would be full of filler. But they weren't that old. You know, we're talking about cars from maybe 78, 77, 78, 79, and I was buying them around about 89, 90, 91. So they were only about 12 years old, but unbelievably rotten. But the car I really wanted, and they were a bit more expensive because they were more collectible at the time. In the sort of late 80s, early 90s, I think I got my first one in 93, was a Series 1 manual, a 4.2 manual with overdrive, and that is just sublime. A totally different animal to the automatics. Quite fast, much sportier, and in Series 1 form, quite raucous, very raw experience, a little bit like an E-Type, and surprisingly fast. And I had a beautiful 1971. It was British Racing Green. It was a Daimler Sovereign manual overdrive with a biscuit interior, and I totally adored that car. I did drive it rather too fast. In fact, I drove it like a bloody lunatic. I drove all of them like a maniac in those days. They were nice cars, but they weren't the collector's cars they are today. They were 12, 15 years old. How old would the Series 1 have been? That was 71, and I bought it about 90. Yeah, so I suppose it was about 23 years old at the time. It wasn't massively old. And the Mark 10 was 24 years old when I bought it. So yeah, they were old but not ancient like they would be now. They're obviously in their 50s now. But I had a couple of late 70s V12s, a Series 2, and then I had a Series 3, that was 79. What else? Oh yes, one of the most amazing things, that Series 1 that I told you about, that I used to see occasionally being driven around during the early 80s through to the late 80s. During the sort of late 1980s, I was working, and I used to catch the bus. And this was before I'd sort of managed to get my own, I was about 16, 17, before I got my own driving licence and bought my own Jaguar. I used to catch the bus and saw, parked on the side of the road about 10 miles from the family home, this 1972 Series 1 I used to see blasting around in the early to mid 80s, and it was just parked up on somebody's drive. And obviously I went past on the bus. Kept seeing it, but I never spoke to the owner because I was always on the bus. And time went by, and the thing, it sat there, the tyres went flat and rust appeared on the body, and it literally sat there for years. And I had my time with sort of Series 3s, the Mark 10 and a low Series 1. Then I went down and I went and knocked on the guy's door and asked him to sell me this car, and he said no. He said, I've had it for years, and I intend to get it restored. And he couldn't do the bodywork himself, but he said he was going to get it restored. But this went on for some time, and eventually, after about 4 or 5 years of pressing, he eventually agreed to sell it to me, because obviously the bodywork had gone so bad by this time. It was in a real state, and every single body panel needed welding, but mechanically it was amazing. And the underside, all the inner sills, the floor pan was perfect, but the outer sills and every single body panel was rotten. But by which time I'd learned to weld and make panels, so it wasn't much of a problem to me. But the real amazing thing about that car, this guy that owned that, he was a HGV mechanic, so he was very good with the mechanical side of things, and he'd modified the car enormously. He'd put performance cams, he'd put a light and flywheel on the, so it revved furiously. What the real beauty was, it had a Mark 10 triple carbs, so it was extremely throaty and powerful. It shortened the gear stick, so it was a bit of a swine to get it into gear. With those things, even with the full length gear stick, which is about 10 or 11 inches long, it's quite a wand. You do need the leverage, and he cut it down so it was short and racy looking, but it was a right bastard to change the gears. Oh, he'd done all sorts. He put V12 brakes on it, which are 3-pot calipers, I think, which meant he couldn't keep the Series 1 rims. So it had the wrong wheels on it, but at least it had strong brakes. And that thing was just frenzied. It really was a fast car. And it sounded rather amazing, because they have, in the exhaust system, they have four silencers, and it removed the front silencer on one side and the rear silencer on the other side. So it only had 2 silencers, and it had this bizarre rasp and snort, and it popped and spit. It was a wonderful thing. It was a real handful to drive. Quite hard work, but bloody hell was it fast. Very, very, very fast. Sort of E-Type kind of fast. It was astonishing. And I drove it fast, if I'm not ashamed to say. It was, when would this be? 96, 97, 98 time, you know, there weren't many sort of speed cameras on the roads, and you could get away with it in those days. But that car came to an end. I ran over a piece of rope in the road, and it sort of flicked up and got wedged in the manifold and caught fire. Set fire to the underseal, set fire to the fuel lines. So yeah, that was a disaster. But I don't know, you know, it was a shame, but these things happen. And I think that was probably the most exciting to drive out of all of them. The original manual is probably a better all-round experience. It's not so frenzied and not such an aggressive white-knuckle ride. It depends what you want. Those days driving like that have passed. I don't drive like that anymore. So I wouldn't go for a modified car, you know. What else? I can't remember. I've had so many, it's ludicrous. And it's been over 32 years and I've never sort of tired of them. The itch has never gone away. I've never got fed up. I love them just as much today as I did then. You know, this one I'm driving now, it's 1984. And I just love it. It's an original car, which I'm slowly restoring. And it's just lovely. You know, they waft about. What else? You have various V12s. And then I had more recently, I bought it purely on a whim, actually. It was one of the very later models, an X300, a 3.2 litre. And I didn't think I was going to like it. I thought it was going to be rather a bit too modern for my taste. I was very surprised how much like the original XJ6 they are. You know, they sort of, through a squinted eye, they look remarkably like an XJ6. The curves and the shape, the seating position, very similar. And the 6-cylinder version, you know, they do a V8, which I'm not so keen on. It's smooth, but it just doesn't feel like a Jaguar to me. And the 6-cylinder, it really feels like a Jaguar. And I was surprised how much I love that car. And you know, I did about 150,000 miles in 3 years in mine. And that was the last one I had before this I've got here. I don't know, I've probably had 18, 20 Jaguars over the years, and I never intend to be without one. I love this car. I'm certainly going to continue to do a running restoration on it, and I can't see me ever parting with it, quite frankly. I do miss the V12s. I miss the Series 1 manual, but they're very, very pricey now, and I don't think I'd ever have another one. I couldn't really justify trying to commit that sort of level of money to a personal obsession like this. No, I don't think I would, but I don't know, if a Series 2 or a Series 3 V12 came along at the right price that was original, needing an overhaul like this one I'm doing here came along at the right price, possibly in the future when this one's completely done, it's something I could consider. But I wouldn't stretch myself to do it, and I certainly wouldn't be selling this one to do so. But they're just remarkable things. Nothing drives like an XJ Jaguar, the way they sort of waft around. But if you want to drive them fast, they're certainly very fast, and the V12s are spookily silent. I'm almost to the point of being boring. They're that eerily and spookily silent. Yeah, dare I say it, they're actually a little bit boring. There's just no sound whatsoever, but a remarkable and wonderful experience. But I do miss the V12, but I wouldn't trade this one in to get a V12. It'd just be nice if the situation arose that I would be able to, you know, maybe have another V12 and keep this one, but who knows. But anyway, I'm sort of rambling and just reminiscing and you know, killing the time on these 4-hour drives. But I'll cut this short, and I say cut it short, it's been about 15 minutes, but I'll carry on concentrating on doing what I should be doing and driving.